Is there a sort of a mission statement we can begin with? If I ask you, how do you want to change the world? What's the answer?
No prejudice. I think that's pretty much the top line. I want to live in a world where minorities are listened to, where the lived experience of minorities is counted for something, and how institutional and systemic prejudice is taught within schools or those kind of bodies. I would love institutionalized racism to be taught to kids so that we have a reference point so that these kids aren't thinking that it's normal.
And you basically spend your life now being an advocate, being an activist.
Yeah, I think so.
So how did this start?
I mean, it's something that I've always been interested in. It's something that I've always been doing in some form or another. But obviously, when the Facebook post was picked up by a newspaper and that all happened with L'Oreal, that obviously took it into another sphere. And then I was speaking about what that meant and what I really meant by the post. And yeah, it just took it into another realm. But that's really what I'm focused on.
Let's just talk about that briefly, seeing as it comes up. I mean, when did you start modelling?
I had my first job when I was about 23.
And how did that come about?
I was modelling for a Lebanese couture designer, so I used to spend a lot of my time in nightclubs when I was at the beginning of my transition, because I wanted to work in an environment that was encouraging me to be who I wanted to be, and I didn't feel like I could fit into the work environment that I was in anyway. I worked in fashion publicity, and it was a really cutthroat environment. I didn't feel emotionally supported, so I just got into modelling through word of mouth. The couture designer wanted a trans model and to support the trans community within that job, so he picked me.
And then how did L'Oreal come about?
That was a long time down the line. That's like 7 years down the line. It was just an email that landed in my inbox. They wanted someone of my experience, a trans person, and someone that fitted the shade of the makeup that they were promoting. And I guess I ticked both of the boxes, and that's how that happened.
Because this was a campaign of changing colours, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. They were adding a lot of new shades to the collection, and as diversity is such a hot topic at the moment, especially within the fashion and beauty industry, they decided to, pick me, and I slotted into the campaign that way.
Now, it all unravelled because of this Facebook post.
Yes.
So what was the Facebook post really about, and what had inspired it?
The Facebook post was really about the Charlottesville riots, and I wrote a reactionary status to that, and I was extremely hurt, angry, frustrated, but lucid as well. I mean, what we saw happen was horrendous. We were seeing white supremacists run over people that were campaigning against racism with cars, and it killed a woman. And to see that happening, and also to see Donald Trump becoming president, to see Brexit happening, and just feeling that sense of hopelessness that, the country is heading in such a direction that's going to be very, very difficult to steer back from. I was angry, and I don't take back anything that I put in the status, but it was taken largely out of context.
Well, let's just unpick it and work out what you really meant.
Okay.
Because what was quoted in the newspapers was honestly, I don't have energy to talk about the racial violence of white people anymore. Mm-hmm. Yes, all white people, mm-hmm. because most of you all don't even realise or refuse to acknowledge that your existence, privilege, and success as a race is built on the backs, blood, and death of people of colour. Mm-hmm. And it was the all white people thing.
Yeah. Because all white people benefit from
people, wasn't it?
Well, all white people benefit from structural and institutionalized racism, because it's a system that is built to uphold whiteness and uphold white people as the standard to aspire to. And the success of this country is largely down to colonialism, which is white supremacy. The success of America is down to slavery and also colonialism. So That's what I meant. The success of the white race has literally been down to racism.
So when you were talking about racial violence, now obviously this was a response to a literal act of violence in America.
Yeah, of course.
Are you saying, when you're talking about racial violence there, you were talking about empire and colonialism, or were you
Not
literally talking about
necessarily.
violence?
I'm talking
because
about
that's what people objected to, wasn't it?
No, racism is in all different. There's not one shade of racism. It's a whole spectrum. There's everything from microaggressions. There's things from bias, unconscious bias. There's physical racism. There's abuse. There's harassment. There's all forms of racism. But the majority of white people don't know what racism really is. When we're talking about racism, people instantly go to, oh, I'm not actively racist, but are you unconsciously racist? And that's what I was talking about as well. I'm talking about the whole spectrum of racism.
But you stand by the blanket nature of it, referring to all white people.
Yeah, of course.
Is it okay to talk about all black people or all Asian people? Or...
the point is that white people aren't oppressed. There's no oppression that white people experience in this country because of their race. You may experience individual instances of racism or prejudice, no, not racism, prejudice. So I could be racially prejudiced to a white person, and that's not right either. And I should be held accountable if I am. But you're not going to experience institutionalized racism or systemic racism because the system is not built to oppress you. So if it's a white person oppressing a black person, then that's a hierarchical thing and it's punching downwards. But a black person could never be racist to a white person in the same way because we just do not have the power to.
I mean, these are well-trodden arguments.
Yes, of course. It's nothing new. I'm not saying anything, that's out of the... This is racial theory.
But I suppose the trouble people have with it is the accusatory nature of it.
It's only accusatory because I'm not a white man. If I was a white cisgender man, heterosexual man saying these things, and white cisgender heterosexual men have said these things, when I posted that status, the singer Lorde posted pretty much exactly the same thing. No one said a word. The only reason why that status got the traction that it did is because of my intersections and because it was such a scandal that a black transgender queer woman spoke up against racism. Because if I had been a white cisgender heterosexual man, then there would not have been the hoo-ha.
Do you think it might have, in retrospect, been wiser to acknowledge the good, though? As well. In
what?
Well, this post, as I say, is not. It's not saying that anything that lots of other academics haven't argued about history. But I suppose what wound up the Daily Mail and all those people was just that initial statement equating racial violence with all white people.
But what do you mean the good?
The good in white people, the fact that not all white people are racist.
But I'm not here to promote
that.
white people.
No,
white people are continuously promoted and embellished and celebrated every single day. We live in a country that is 86, 87% white people. And the narrative is that whiteness is best. Whiteness is celebrated every single day. I'm not here to celebrate something that is celebrated disproportionately. And I'm here to speak about things that aren't spoken about. I'm here to outline and embolden ideas that are shoved to the backs because black thinking and black theology and amazing ideas are just not being pushed to the forefront. And it's extremely frustrating for a huge cross-section of the society that are just seen as not as great or not as important because they're not white. So
can white people be your allies?
White people are my allies, yeah. And if you're an ally, yes, but simply the fact that you're white doesn't make you an ally. If you're white and you're doing something, then of course, like my mother's white. And I'm not against all white people. I'm against the idea of saying you're not racist but you're not doing anything. I'm against that. I don't think it's enough for people to say, I'm not racist.
You've got to do something
You've got to do something because you're already participating in a society that puts you to the top because of racism. So if you're looking to not be racist, then do something to dismantle racism. And there's many things that you can do. And there's many think pieces, there's many YouTube tutorials, there's many things on Google for anybody that's like, but I don't know what to do, and just waiting for a person of color to educate, which is then emotional labor for the people of color, which is then a product of racism. So,
I mean, it's very interesting that the thing that sort of got you into hot water was to do with race rather than gender.
Yeah.
Do you think gender had anything to do with it?
Oh my God, of
trans
course. I don't
identity
think,
had anything to do
Yeah,
with
I don't think that you can pick them apart. I think that when people hear information that they don't instantly agree with, or even when people hear information, it really is dependent on where they hear the information from.
So do you think people reacted to you saying it because you were a trans model at the time as well?
Well, of course. I mean, if you look at all of the headlines, it's trans model says. It wasn't person says. It was instantly put into the top that this information is coming from a trans woman of color. And what do you feel about that? So it instantly sets the tone.
What did this whole experience teach you about tolerance?
Tolerance isn't what we need. We need understanding. We need acceptance. We need people that are willing to coexist beyond toleration. It isn't about tolerance. It's about understanding. It's about embracing people, not tolerating people, because tolerating already means that you've allowed someone to come into your space, not you are willing to share the space. And that's what this country has a problem with, I feel, is sharing. We've seen it with Brexit. We've seen it with just the general way that the majority seems to think that if we're the majority, then that means that this is ours, when really I want the world to be thinking more about countries as land masses rather than, property, because we don't own it.
Again, when this happened, you then got into a big row with Piers Morgan, and you're invited on to do these things, to defend yourself, to go on the news, and to have rows with people almost sort of professionally.
Well, I wouldn't say that I want to have rows with people. They turn into rows because a lot of people take it personally. I think it turns personal because people take it personally when really it isn't anything to do with them individually. It's to do with all of us as a society.
But what did you, again, learn about how open-minded we are, how sharing we are, going through that whole experience? Because you'll have been criticised on all sorts of different levels.
Yes.
For your argument, for what you were saying about race, for your gender, for your demeanour, for you're accused of sort of publicising yourself in that whole process. There will have been a lot of negativity, I'd imagine, during that whole period. Must have been very hurtful. How did you come out of that period?
I've just got a very good support system, and I know who I am as a person.
But what did you come out feeling about Britain?
It was all a confirmation of what I knew already. And if we look at how things have panned out since what I said, and all of the arguments and all of the conversations that have been had since that L'Oreal scandal, and how more people are actively researching and questioning what we think about race and what we think about inclusivity and diversity, I think it's opened a lot of minds. Whether or not you agree with me or whether you disagree with me, it still forced people to have conversations that they weren't having. So, I mean, for me personally, I think it did confirm a lot about how we function as a society, about how we like to watch people's downfalls, and how we address information largely down to who is giving the information.
Did you feel you'd lost control of your own life?
No. I felt like the one thing that I had was how I reacted to the situations. I think with my life, just generally, I've never really felt in control of how it goes, because so much of my life is down to how people react to me. Being trans, being a woman, being black as well. I've got misogyny, transphobia, even homophobia as well, walking down the street with my girlfriend and then having guys commenting on the fact that we're two women. There's so many different levels of how I need to navigate my life depending on how other people react to me. So I didn't really feel that was any different. I just felt like, it's heightened racism or it's heightened misogyny. But the way that I had control is how I respond to it.
Can we talk about them being trans? And your own experience. Tell me about your childhood. I mean, you grew up in Hertfordshire.
Yes.
So tell me, what was it like?
It
Your
was,
childhood?
yeah, I mean, I was lucky. My parents are two extremely loving people, and they provided a really good childhood for me for what they could. I was the only mixed race kid in my school. So for a while, I felt like, I just fitted in. And then a lot of the rest of the time was trying to fit in because I stood out.
From when? When were you aware that you stood out?
I think it was probably where I went through puberty quite early. So I think when all of the other kids started going through puberty and feeling like they stood out, and then when you feel like you stand out, you kind of want to fit in even more. So all of the people that could fit into each other, fit in with each other did. And I went to an all-boys school. So that was extremely traumatic being not a boy.
How did you stand out?
I stood out because I was extremely effeminate, and it was clear. I mean, if you'd known about the trans experience, then you probably would have been able to see that in me. So I got mistook for a girl all the time on holiday, and I just did not fit in with the rest of the kids at school because I just wasn't a boy.
What did you feel you were as a young child?
I don't really think that I felt like I was any gender identity. I mean, it's like, when did you first feel that you were a boy? It's like, do you know what I mean?
But a lot of parents, constantly sort of, reinforce the gender of their children.
Well, that's it.
And so did your parents do that with you? Were you bought,
I don't really think they did.
Nerf guns and blue clothes? And...
No, I had My Little Ponies. My mum gave me My Little Ponies. I don't think my dad was too happy about that. But I don't know. I think my parents did let me, to a certain extent, just be. And I think that was good of them. But I mean, they did find it quite hard. I could tell that they found it quite hard. My dad's quite hyper-masculine. As soon as they saw that I was happy, that pretty much subsided.
And so, what age are we talking when this is all becoming apparent?
To be honest, it's always been apparent. I've always just been super feminine, and it's not like I changed. It's just that I had the language to define myself.
When you say you were effeminate, what do you mean? I mean, and where did that come from? Because it's this is sort of learned behaviour, isn't it?
No,
mannerisms,
I don't think so.
Language and.
I don't think so. I mean, if we're sold the narrative that all, female children act feminine and all male children act masculine, it's not like that. My natural behaviour was feminine. It wasn't learned from anywhere.
What do you mean by feminine as a child?
Well, I mean, typically feminine by societal standards. So just very girly. I was just one of the girls.
And so when did you start having a conversation with yourself and then with other people, whether it was your parents first or friends, I don't know, about being a girl?
It wasn't really until I was about 18, 19 that I told my first friend that I thought I was transgender. And I didn't have the conversation with my parents until I was about 24.
Wow.
Yeah. That's it, though, when there's no information out there that you can, I mean, this was way before like Caitlyn Jenner or any like media information about trans people. And the narrative that we were told is if you were transgender, then you would die and you would be miserable for the rest of your life, or you'd become a porn star or a prostitute. They were like pretty much the only dreams that were sold.
So how did you start to think that you are a trans?
Well, you internalize it and you associate it with that I'm never going to have a good life. I'm never going to be who I want to be. I'm never going to be able to find someone who loves me. It's very much the same narrative as what a gay person may encounter. Apart from gay people now have those role models.
Yeah, no, and exactly, and even then. Britain was much more open about homosexuality than it is now, probably, about transgender. So, I suppose, was there a point at which you thought, right, this is what I am, and this is... This is what I'm
really
going
isn't.
through. Because our knowledge of it was so...
It was more along the lines of, well, I guess I'm trans.
Right.
Like, it wasn't like, I'm definitely trans, because I think when you first start your transition, you kind of feel like a little bit like, I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, there's all of this information out there. The majority of it's negative, but I think this is who I am. And that's the way that we all navigate our lives. I mean, when did you first know that you were straight? Or, do you know what I mean? You just assume, well, I guess I'm straight because I find women attractive. Or, like, I guess, like, that I'm pansexual. I find, like, all genders attractive, but it's still very much, I guess I'm pansexual because I'm using a word that other people are giving me, and that's the thing that I gravitate towards the most. So I guess I'm pansexual. And like, I know that I'm trans now because I've had so many years living and analyzing all the information that's out there. But at the beginning, you don't really know. That's just the language that's there and someone else's definition of how you may be feeling.
Would it be possible that you wouldn't have identified this?
Oh, no. No. Not the way that my life was going. I had a severe eating disorder that was manifesting because I couldn't transition, because I was so... I was just rock bottom emotionally. I just wasn't eating. And it was because I was starving myself because I wanted my body to stop developing masculine traits. And as soon as I started hormone therapy, that just stopped. So I would have ended up causing myself severe harm, probably, if I hadn't transitioned.
So when did you start having hormone therapy?
When I was 24.
So 6 years between, is what you said, or 5 years between sort of saying to yourself, well, I think I'm trans.
Yes.
To you actually then doing something medical about it.
Mm-hmm.
Why the delay?
Because it's policy that you need to live as your desired gender, whatever the terminology they give, for 2 years anyway. So from the moment that you go to your GP or the psychiatrist to analyze you, from that moment to hormone therapy is a 2-year gap anyway. And it's an extremely scary thing, like saying, I'm going to change the chemistry of my body with hormones, and I have no idea how my body's going to react to it. And from that, I needed that time to just process. It just needed it to just confirm to myself that this is what I wanted for myself. And also, there was no language out there. There was no YouTube tutorials like there is now of, kids that are starting their hormone therapy and documenting how it's going to go. I had no reference point. I didn't know what was going to happen. It was just like, oh, I guess I'm going to start taking these pills now. And you've got, your doctor telling you how it's going to react with all of these possible side effects, and you just don't know.
Was it a kind experience to go through?
Oh my God, no, it was awful. It was terrible. It's like another puberty. And like, who would want to go through puberty again? It's terrible, and you need to go through.
I mean, in the way people treated you. I mean, I can imagine that
was terrible too.
would be difficult to deal with. But I just mean in terms of the experience of the system and what you have to go through. And how much that has changed.
It was awful. The first time that I went to my GP and said, I think I'm transgender. Actually, no, I went in and I said, I know I'm transgender, because I was that desperate to transition. And I thought that any wavering, then they would probably try and convince me that I wasn't, which I've heard a lot of stories about doctors saying that, oh, you're just confused. So I went in there and I said, I'm transgender. I want to be put on hormone therapy. I had no idea how the system worked. They then transferred me to a psychiatrist, and then the psychiatrist transferred me to the Charing Cross Clinic, which specialise in helping transgender people. And then I had about 3 appointments there. And there's like, between the psychiatrist and the clinic, it's like I think I waited about a year. There's a huge waiting list, and the waiting list has gone up now because there's even more people that realise that they're transgender now.
Why do you think that is?
Because there's more information out there. But it's a hugely long process, and it's a overcomplicated process, and it's not one that listens to people, really. And I think that if people realise the damage that is being done by not listening to people, they would realise that it's really not that big of a deal. The the right thing to do is to listen to people and to help people, not try to tell them, and then squish it down, because that just represses and turns into something else. If I had the information to have transitioned earlier, then I probably wouldn't have, plummeted to such a minute size with an eating disorder. I don't understand how someone who isn't trans can make a decision for someone who is, when you would never experience that.
So how should we change the system?
There's so many different ways, from teaching in schools that, transgender people are normal. The majority of people are cisgender, but just because you're trans doesn't make you any way unworthy of a decent education or happiness or realizing your goals. I think it's important that we teach kids from an early age that people are different, that we teach prejudice and racism and unconscious bias within the workplace, so that issues like what we've seen around the world don't happen, of people being actively discriminated in public. It's far too late to educate a lot of adults, but I don't think it's too late to educate children. And there's absolutely nothing that can go wrong from showing people that people are different and we can all coexist.
Do you think we're on basically the same trajectory we were on in the 90s with regard to homosexuality? That very, very quickly, Britain changed. Almost overnight, we suddenly became very accepting.
I think we're a long way behind. Because we don't have. There's a lot of legislation against trans people, and there wasn't that legislation in the 90s against trans people. I mean,
all right. Well, then quickly tick them off. What are the ways that? Because again, the gay community have basically cracked it legally
because there's men there, and I feel that because there's so much misogyny against trans women. Anyway, there's trans misogyny, then we're fighting a battle because of our gender as well.
So what are the laws you need changed?
So, I mean, there's a conversation about right to self-ID, just people's right to change the marker on their birth certificate or passport with more ease than having to, go through all of these long-winded processes. I would like transphobia being actively combated, and for people to actively realize what is transphobic and what isn't. I think that there's so much information being put out there, especially in newspapers, that is trans exclusionary, especially from people that call themselves feminists, and especially women that call themselves or identify with the left. And it's extremely damaging, and false accusations saying that trans women are a danger to or a threat to the safety of cisgender women when there's absolutely no statistics to suggest that we are. There's this narrative saying that a cisgender man could go into a changing room and say that they're transgender and then sexually assault people. But that whole mentality that a cisgender man is going to legally change his gender to then go and do something
in order to be able to go and do this
illegal is a wild accusation. But then that is still being played out in the media when there's absolutely no statistics to say that trans women, or instances, I mean, one or two.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? When you get the one or two, when you get the prison case.
Yeah, but there's
how where does that leave you? It must leave you infuriated.
It does leave me infuriated, but then it's no different to say, there's cases of cisgender women abusing children, but the vast majority are not cisgender women abusing children. It's cisgender men abusing children, and a demographic. I mean, that's. It's frustrating when people take one or two cases and then turn that against the whole community, because that's not being done with, cisgender women. I'm not then turning around and saying you're a danger to your own children because this person abused this child. It's wild. It doesn't make any sense to me.
You mentioned feminism and left-wing feminism, and there is now this well-worn argument around feminism and transgender women. Do you think there is an accommodation? Do you think there's anywhere you can meet
in
the middle
Well, yeah, of course. I think if your feminism is inclusive of trans people, and that would be intersectional feminism, but if your feminism is largely down to only referencing feminism from the 1950s or feminism from the 60s or 70s, that is largely just white feminism, that doesn't include the contributions of black women, that doesn't include the contributions of trans women, then that isn't the kind of feminism that I'm down with. I'm down with feminism that includes everybody.
So when you've experienced feminist left-wing women shouting, "You're a man," at you or others
on live TV,
how do you compute that?
I'm not surprised by it because it's what I've experienced my whole life. And it's what I've seen happen. Like, I'm well versed in history and...
But how do you explain these people who regard themselves as tolerant, inclusive, progressive, of the left, also having this ability to be so exclusive towards you?
I mean, I don't really know like how to respond to them, to be honest, half the time, because if you can't see your discrimination, then I can't convince you. Then there's not really anything for me to do. The only thing that I can do is focus on the positives and focus on amazing feminists that are inclusive, and there's so many of them. So when a cisgender woman barks at me and says, "You are diminishing my rights by existing," how do you respond to that? What can I do?
If we are quite behind progress, in inverted commas, in the way that Britain changed with regard to homosexuality, what do you think can be done about it?
Opportunities, really. People... I mean, it's opportunities, but it's also where do these opportunities come? But it's just education.
I mean, is it all just about schools, or is it all about...
It's education, and it's funding for services that help trans people. The amount of trans women of colour that are contracting HIV every single year is going up, because the amount of trans women that are out of work, that are seeking sex work as a last resort, is massive. So it's services to help trans people, it's services to educate people that aren't trans. The list is just endless. As a basis, education for children, so that we can, if we can't educate the adults, then let's educate the kids. And if they're not willing to give that education, then that just shows that it's institutional, that institutionalized transphobia is the reason why we're not getting anywhere, because it's being sanctioned.
Do you think Britain in general is becoming a more welcoming and inclusive place, or not? I mean, we live in a very sort of angry political time.
We do.
In which immigration has been a huge issue recently, and that has got all sorts of sort of knock-ons in terms of its impact on racism in general, and you know, sort of putting up barriers rather than
Brexit.
Breaking them down. How's that affected your life or your community?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of hate crimes that have gone up since Brexit is huge, and it's going up. And the amount of my friends that have been told, go back to your own country when they were born here, it's really upsetting. And it is, I mean, I've seen a lot happen, obviously, because I'm of mixed heritage. So I'm a lot more exposed to kind of seeing it from like both sides in my direct sphere. But the way that things like Brexit and the Trump administration coming into power have emboldened people that are racist or discriminative or misogynist is horrendous, and it's getting worse.
So is being an activist on this agenda a constant struggle? I mean, do you find yourself constantly wanting to walk away from it?
Sometimes I just like kind of, you know, scream into my pillow. But
Because it's tough to put yourself out there, isn't it?
Yeah, ultimately, I'm lucky that I get to work with some amazing people. I get to go to some amazing places and meet other people that maybe aren't as privileged as myself. I mean, I'm hugely privileged to have been trans and born in the UK. I mean, our rights are so much more progressed than a lot of places. So I want to go and use that privilege to go and help other people. And that's where I get my fulfillment. I couldn't go and work in an office and I would feel like I was doing nothing with my life. I want to use my strength to help and empower other women like myself. And not even just women like myself, women in general, or anybody that's any minority.
I mean, this would normally be a stupid question, but I think it's kind of appropriate for you in your position. I mean, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I always say that the only goal is happiness because it's not a given. And I genuinely just hope that I'm happy and hope that I'm bringing happiness to other people. I don't know where my life's going to be. I couldn't have foreseen that my life was going to take this turn 2 years ago. So to say that I've got a 10-year plan is kind of fruitless because my life will not be anything like I think it will. So I just hope that I'm happy and that I'm making other people happy and that hopefully opening a few minds. I think the most encouraging thing that I experience on a weekly basis is messages from white people or men or anybody that's at the top of the pecking order, that I've changed their mind or that I've opened their mind or that they've then had a conversation with somebody else and then changed their mind or even just opening your mind or open to another perspective.
What is the hardest bit of this? What is the hardest way to change the world, you think, that is the biggest hurdle?
The biggest hurdle is, I feel like my biggest hurdle is myself sometimes. I feel when you're constantly abused online and you've constantly got people waiting for you to fail, when you are being told about yourself a lot, it's hard not to take that on. And being so under the spotlight of the tabloids this year was quite hard to navigate. But it's taught me a lot about myself, and I genuinely feel the strongest I've ever felt. So I would say that the biggest obstacle sometimes, although it obviously with my situation is institutionalized racism and transphobia and misogyny, all that kind of stuff, but then I can combat that if I believe in myself and if I'm not sabotaging myself. But a lot of the time it does force you down that route.
Well, Munroe Bergdorf, thank you very much indeed for sharing your ways to change the world.
Thank you.